For more than 40 years, Harrison Ford has entertained moviegoers, earning a $230 million fortune along the way.
You're like the king of Hollywood, right?
Oh, yeah.
He's the movie star who gave Han Solo his swagger and made archaeology cool as fedora-wearing Indiana Jones. Ford has kept his personal life out of the spotlight until 2000, when he let it all hang out.
When a marriage is on the rocks, a lot of times people have a tendency to act out and not behave like themselves. And fans were starting to think, wait, this isn't the guy I thought he was.
What followed was one of the most expensive divorces in Hollywood history.
With homes from coast to coast, airplanes, helicopters, cars, millions of dollars in the bank, this was never going to be a simple divorce proceeding.
On this episode of Fortune Fights, husband and wife media experts Danielle and Andy Mayoras guide us through Harrison Ford's rise to the top of Hollywood's A-list, his multi-million-dollar film roles, and the choices that shattered his family and risked his fortune. Few actors have played as many iconic characters as Harrison Ford during his 50-year career in show business.
Harrison Ford, there's no question, you're everyone's favourite.
You're very kind.
Andy and Danielle Mayoras talk us through some of the legal disputes he ran into along the way.
Harrison Ford is one of Hollywood's most beloved actors. He's been an integral part of several of the biggest blockbuster movie franchises, bringing characters like Han Solo and Indiana Jones to life.
And those roles were just the beginning for Ford.
He became an A-list actor because of his versatility. Of course, he played the major franchise roles, but he also played a doctor on the run in The Fugitive, the President of the United States in Air Force One, and a CIA agent in the Patriot Games. He could do anything or become anyone.
One good thing also about Harrison Ford is, even though he's playing different roles, you saw him as the character he was playing. I don't think many people were going, oh, there's Indiana Jones, and he's on Air Force One. You saw him as whatever the character was he was playing in each film.
People thought they knew who Ford was from the movies, but the man behind the fedora was a very different story.
Harrison Ford, he's excellent at compartmentalizing. The fact is, there's a side of them that actually wants to take a walk on the dark side.
But the dark side was not Ford's natural habitat. He was born in 1942 and grew up in the Chicago suburb of Des Plaines, Illinois. His father worked as an advertising executive, and his mother was a homemaker.
The Fords had a really nice middle-class lifestyle, and in 1945, Harrison's parents presented him with the present, his brother Terrence. The two went on to become great friends.
At school, however, Ford struggled to fit in with the other kids.
He used to get bullied. The school he went to was sitting on top of a hill, so every day when he'd come out, the bullies would wind up pushing him down the hill, and he'd have to crawl back up.
Ford said that the bullying he endured early on was a good lesson in persistence. And who knows, maybe that was good preparation for the rogue characters he would play later on.
After graduating high school in 1960, Ford enrolled at Ripon College in Wisconsin, where he studied English and philosophy and also signed up for an acting class.
Harrison said that he was actually very shy, and the acting class helped him overcome that.
Ford then began dating fellow student Mary Marquardt.
Now, Marquardt was a Wisconsin native. She was an honors student, and unlike Ford, who dropped out, she was also a cheerleader and just somebody who really enjoyed academics.
In 1964, Harrison Ford decided to drop out of college in his senior year to pursue acting. The couple married that same year, and soon after headed west to Hollywood in search of acting work for Ford.
Ford began his career, like most actors of his generation, as a contract player for Columbia Pictures.
Ford's early years in Hollywood were kind of like his school days. He would climb up that big hill just to get pushed down again, but he would keep climbing and just keep getting back up.
Now, when he first got there, he signed a contract paying him a whole whopping $150 a week. Needless to say, that wasn't a lot of money for he and his wife to live off of.
In 1966, the Fords' finances were stretched even further when they welcomed a son, Benjamin. But a year later, things seemed to be on the upswing when Ford landed his first credited role in the film A Time for Killing, where he played a young lieutenant in the Union Army.
The movie was a fairly large production. It starred Glenn Ford, who was known from the Hollywood Golden Era, and this was Harrison Ford's first major speaking role.
But not long after the film was released, Columbia dropped the 25-year-old actor, stripping him of his $150 a week salary.
There was an executive there who really didn't like Ford. In fact, he berated him for a role that he was playing as a bellhop.
He said, "I want to tell you a story, kid." He said the first time Tony Curtis was ever in a movie, he delivered a bag of groceries. That's a movie star. And I leaned across this guy's desk and I said, "I thought you were supposed to think that that was a grocery delivery boy." And he threw me out of his office, naturally.
Out of work, Ford struggled to support his family, which grew to include a second son, Willard, in 1969. He continued auditioning and eventually signed a contract with Universal Studios, where he landed guest roles on hit TV series like The Virginian and Gunsmoke.
Ford was worried that if he continued to just guest star in different TV programs, it might ruin the chances of him ever being taken seriously, and he didn't want it to stand in his way of landing a lead role.
So after just a year and a half with Universal, Ford parted ways with the studio.
Ford didn't get off to a good start with the Hollywood studios. He broke contracts with 2 studios in under 4 years.
With a growing family to support, Ford had to find a different line of work to make ends meet.
When Harrison Ford wasn't acting, he was also finding work as a carpenter. He would take carpentry jobs wherever he can find them, including on movie sets. He said the best part about having this second income was that he could take care of his family and wait for those better roles to come along.
Ford had no practical experience when it came to woodworking or carpentry. He went to the library, checked out books, and taught himself.
Alongside his carpentry work, Ford kept auditioning, and in 1972, he caught his first big break when he read for a young director fresh out of film school named George Lucas.
George Lucas was directing the film American Graffiti, all about California teens and the hot rod society at that time. Now, he cast Harrison Ford as the wisecracking Bob Falfa, a guy with a hot car.
Hey, you see this Miller, you tell him I'm looking for him, huh?
Ford was paid $500 a week for a few weeks of shooting, and the film went on to earn a surprising $55 million at the box office.
The movie was an unexpected hit, and Ford made a great impression on George Lucas, who eventually helped take Harrison Ford into a new galaxy.
In 1975, George Lucas was casting for this new massive space odyssey film that sort of harkened back to the Flash Gordon movie serials of the 1930s.
A film that took place in a galaxy far, far away. A film called Star Wars. Crucial to the story was the role of the arrogant space smuggler and pilot, Han Solo.
Harrison Ford wanted to try out for the role of Han Solo. Lucas said no because he only wanted new faces.
So rather than auditioning for the part, Ford volunteered to read alongside the other actors who were auditioning.
If the Empire had a new weapon that could do this, I'd know about it. I'd have heard something.
Well, now you know.
Some of the young actors to answer the casting call: Kurt Russell, Sylvester Stallone, and Al Pacino.
George Lucas had a decision to make, and he went with Harrison Ford over all of the actors he had already auditioned.
Ford signed on to the project and was set to earn $1,000 a week for 10 to 12 weeks of filming. The 34-year-old was about to embark on the biggest role of his career, but it would put a major strain on his personal life.
Spending that much time away filming would put a strain on any marriage, especially when there's 2 young children involved. And on top of that, supposedly Mark Hart was very reserved and wasn't into the Hollywood social scene.
They were having a lot of issues in their marriage, but they decided to try to work it out for the sake of their sons.
When filming for Star Wars began in 1976, Ford was introduced to 20-year-old Carrie Fisher, who played the part of Princess Leia.
Fisher was a fresh-faced beauty that everybody loved, and she was hilarious. The on-screen chemistry between her and Ford was electric, and some say it poured off the screen as well.
The electricity didn't play so hot with Ford's wife.
When Harrison Ford first started on Star Wars, his sons were 7 and 10 years old. Now that had to be rough for Mary, raising the boys by herself while Harrison was on set.
In the spring of 1976, hot off the heels of shooting Star Wars, Ford quickly jumped onto another film, Apocalypse Now, directed by Francis Ford Coppola.
Coppola was a producer on American Graffiti, so he knew Harrison Ford from that, and lore had it that he had actually hired Ford to do some carpentry work for him.
It was on the set of Apocalypse Now that 34-year-old Ford was introduced to Melissa Mathison, Francis Ford Coppola's 25-year-old executive assistant.
Ford took a liking to Mathison right off the bat. He found her very attractive and noted that they had a strong intellectual connection. However, Ford was married at the time with 2 young children, so reportedly they were nothing more than friends.
Ford wrapped on Apocalypse Now as a relatively unknown actor, but his life and career would change forever when a year later, on May 25, 1977, Star Wars hit the big screen.
Star Wars was like nothing people had ever seen before. It's special effects. Also, it's symphonic music. It's good versus evil. everyone loved Star Wars.
Audiences fell in love with the characters, especially the handsome, outspoken pilot with a sly grin and a blaster on his hip.
When you think of Harrison Ford, who doesn't think of the brash, lovable Han Solo in Star Wars?
Of course I saw the film as a kid, and I loved it. It was my favorite movie, and there was nothing cooler than Han Solo flying off in the Millennium Falcon with Chewbacca at his side.
The film would go on to be the highest grossing of the 70s. It brought in $775 million globally and knocked Jaws out of the top spot. And while Star Wars made Harrison Ford a household name, it didn't make him rich.
Now, as big a success that Star Wars was, Harrison Ford only made $10,000, got no residuals, and wasn't even on the original poster. While Mark Hamill, on the other hand, who played Luke Skywalker, was paid $650,000 and got a percentage of the movie's profit.
Even though he didn't make a lot of money from the film, it completely changed his career. He became a celebrity overnight.
Ford's career may have been shifting into hyperdrive, but his 13-year marriage was headed into an asteroid field.
Ford admitted that many of the problems he was experiencing in his marriage were largely his fault. Ford knew that he didn't try very hard and didn't put enough effort into his marriage.
In 1979, he and his wife Mary divorced after 15 years.
Ford and Mark Quart had a marriage that just slowly fell apart. When the two split, they did so as friends.
Neither party wanted to completely split up their family, and the couple agreed to joint custody of their 2 sons. This divorce was before Ford's rise to fame, and he had very little to his name as an up-and-coming actor in Hollywood.
When there are not a lot of assets involved and things are pretty civil, divorces can be settled pretty quickly with only minimal court involvement, and that's what happened here with Harrison and Mary.
There may not have been many assets to divide this time, but Harrison Ford was about to become Hollywood's leading man.
He's not only Han Solo, he's Indiana Jones. Very few actors could pull off both roles with such different characters and have fans fall in love with both.
Ford got to a point in his career where he could name any price and he would get it. $5 million, $10 million, $20 million? This was unheard of.
On Fortune Fights, attorneys Danielle and Andy Mayoris take us through some of the most outrageous legal battles in Hollywood. And throughout his illustrious career and 3 marriages, Harrison Ford has stumbled into some big ones.
Just describe your character for us. He's pretty grumpy, isn't he?
He's an ass.
For more than a decade, the young actor paid his dues with minor roles in Hollywood as he tried to support his wife and 2 sons.
But that all changed in 1977 when the world met Han Solo.
It was Star Wars mania. It became the highest grossing film ever, raking in $775 million, knocking Jaws out of first place.
While Ford's stock was on the rise in Hollywood, at home, his 15-year marriage fell apart.
Ford was constantly traveling for work, and he wasn't home much. And reportedly, his wife Mary really didn't like the Hollywood lifestyle. So the more and more famous he became, the bigger problem it became.
In 1979, Harrison and Mary decided to divorce. They separated amicably and decided on joint custody of their 2 sons. Even though Star Wars was a major blockbuster, Ford only made about $10,000 for the role. So when it came to the divorce, there were not many assets for the couple to divide.
A year after the divorce, Ford reprised his role as Han Solo in the Star Wars sequel, The Empire Strikes Back. The film had an $18 million budget, $7 million more than A New Hope, which meant a bigger paycheck for much of the cast. Ford negotiated a $250,000 contract for the sequel, and over $800,000 in today's money. Carrie Fisher, meanwhile, earned $350,000.
Ford may not have made as much money in the sequels as co-stars, but he did take on a much bigger role. In Star Wars, he had a supporting role, but in The Empire Strikes Back, he had his own storyline and much more screen time.
I saw the opportunity in this character to play a part that I thought would be very successful.
Empire was released in May of 1980, and it was another huge box office success. In fact, it brought in more than $500 million. Now, that was a huge sum for any movie, but especially a sequel.
While audiences were flocking to the theaters, Ford was picking up his first leading role on a new project with another up-and-coming director named Steven Spielberg.
George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were good friends, and Lucas went to Spielberg with a new script he had written about an adventure-driven archaeologist named Indiana Smith. Of course, the name was changed, but a new action hero was born.
In 1981, audiences saw Harrison Ford in a new role, Indiana Jones. This time he's part archaeologist, part action hero in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
I didn't even know about the project. I didn't know Spielberg. It didn't occur to me that I would have a chance of doing it.
Ford made $400,000 for the role, which would be over $1 million today. Not a bad paycheck.
The film would go on to make $389 million at the box office and cement Ford's place at the top of Hollywood's A-list. And while talks of sequels to Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Empire Strikes Back were floating around Hollywood, Ford was getting reacquainted with an old friend from his past, Melissa Mathison.
Harrison had met Melissa Mathison back in 1976 on the set of Apocalypse Now. According to them, there was a little bit of spark then, but they couldn't do anything about it because he was married at the time.
Mathison's background was decidedly different than Ford's first wife, Mary.
Melissa grew up in Los Angeles, so she was used to the Hollywood hustle and bustle, whereas Mary was more shy and kept to herself.
At the time, Mathison was in her early 30s and was an up-and-coming screenwriter. She had worked with Francis Ford Coppola on Apocalypse Now and the Godfather series, and she really knew her way around Hollywood.
The couple had a lot in common. They both valued success and made their privacy a priority.
In 1979, she had great success with the movie The Black Stallion. So the next thing you know, Steven Spielberg comes to talk to her about this crazy movie about an extraterrestrial who gets stranded on Earth and needs the help of kids to return home.
Mathison was unsure about writing the film, but at Spielberg's request, Ford convinced her that it was the right move. It would turn out to be the global blockbuster E.T., the Extraterrestrial.
The movie E.T. was literally out of this world.
Steven Spielberg received critical acclaim for his role as director, but much of the film's success came from the words Mathison put on the page.
Mathison took what could have been just a silly movie about an alien and crafted it into something very, very special.
Mathison never publicly revealed how much she was paid to write the screenplay, but we do know that she got a piece of all of the E.T. merchandise. She actually went to the court and argued to the judge that it was her screenplay that served as a blueprint for exactly how E.T. turned out. And the court agreed, and she ended up getting 4% of all merchandise that bore a resemblance to E.T.
E.T. became a global phenomenon. The merchandising from that character, the beloved alien, exploded more than anybody could have imagined at the time.
E.T. went on to make $792 million in theaters, setting a new world record and knocking Star Wars out of the top spot. Mathison was nominated for an Oscar for her screenplay.
It's really crazy to think of how much money Ford and Mathison were making at the time. I mean, they were both at the top of their games. They were a huge Hollywood power couple.
In 1983, Ford and Mathison decided to make it official.
They got married in a 15-minute ceremony at the Santa Monica courthouse. It wasn't this big, star-studded celebrity event.
The couple also decided to keep it simple by foregoing a prenuptial agreement.
You would think that after one failed marriage, Ford would see divorce as a possibility and consider a prenup at the very least. Many couples also just want to avoid the uncomfortable conversation that a prenup involves in the honeymoon phase of the relationship.
Their marriage would become one of the most envied relationships in Hollywood. But keeping their private life private was no easy task for these two Hollywood heavyweights. By the mid-'80s, Ford was once again in the spotlight, continuing to star in major films including Blade Runner, Return of the Jedi, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
With each and every movie, Ford's pay was going up and up. $400,000, $500,000, $800,000. He was becoming a major player in just a few years.
In 1987, Ford and Mathison welcomed a son, Malcolm. 2 years later, Ford landed the biggest payday of his career, a whopping $4 million to act alongside the legendary Sean Connery in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
$4 million for an actor in 1989 was unheard of, and by then Ford was worth tens of millions of dollars. He bought a ranch in Wyoming and a mansion in Brentwood.
A year after the film's release, the couple welcomed their second child, Ford's fourth, a daughter named Georgia. Together, the Fords tried to block their family out of the public eye.
They were determined to shield their children from the business, and they went to great lengths to do that, even enrolling them in school in Manhattan and spending a lot of time on the family ranch in Wyoming.
Now, Harrison Ford incorporated his two sons from his first marriage into the new family, as well as kept good contact with his first wife, Mary.
But finding time for family became more of a challenge in the 90s as Ford took on more roles. In 1997, Ford earned a whopping $22 million for his role as the President of the United States in Air Force One, making him one of the highest-paid actors in the business.
Ford's rise to the top of the Hollywood A-list is really remarkable, especially considering how he started out. I mean, he broke contracts with 2 studios, and he supported his family as a carpenter. I bet in his wildest dreams, he would have never imagined what a big star he would have become.
At the height of his career, Ford was making multiple films a year for $20 million a pop.
He was not only a great actor, but he was a huge box office draw, so any movie that could hitch itself to Harrison Ford was a win-win.
By 1999, Ford had an estimated net worth of more than $64 million, and with a load of disposable cash on hand, he picked up a very expensive hobby.
Ford said his love of flying began way back when in Wisconsin when he was a teen and took some flying lessons. In 1995, he actually got his license, and then he started buying planes left and right.
What if you're on an airplane when you can't get off and next to you is a seatmate from hell? The guy said, "Hey, it's Indiana Jones." What do you do in those situations?
I go out and buy my own plane.
Harrison Ford had millions of dollars tied up in his very expensive hobby. He once said that he had more airplanes than anyone should ever have. He also enjoyed flying so much, he said that he would sometimes just fly up the coast of California to get a cheeseburger and fly back home.
Ford may have been flying high, but his superstardom came at a cost to his family.
Just like with his first wife, Ford's second wife, Melissa, felt like his movie career was taking too much time away from the family, so rumor has it she limited him to one movie project per year.
The couple was also in disagreement about where they wanted to spend their family time.
Melissa preferred living in the city, and so a lot of times she would leave Harrison at the family ranch in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and she would be at their apartment in Manhattan. And word has it they didn't see eye to eye either when it came to their parenting style.
By the late 90s, it seemed Ford was caught trying to balance two lives.
For the second time in his life, Ford was at a bit of a crossroads. He was being pulled in two different directions, being a husband and father on one hand, or being a top box office draw on the other.
It wasn't long before Ford's off-screen choices caught up with him.
There's a thrill, a desire to be exposed that someone like Harrison Ford has, even though once they are found out, it's catastrophic for them.
The impending catastrophe would hit Ford right in his wallet.
When a marriage is on the rocks, oftentimes people act out and they don't behave like themselves. And who knows, maybe this is what happened with Harrison Ford.
By the end of the 1980s, Harrison Ford was at the top of Hollywood's A-list, having led the Star Wars and Indiana Jones franchises to box office gold.
Well, there are a lot more people interested in using my services, much to my delight.
In the 1990s, he became one of the world's highest paid actors, starring in more than 10 films. By 2000, the 58-year-old actor had a reported net worth of more than $64 million. But as his career ran strong, his personal life faltered, leading him into a battle over the millions he had made. Legal analysts and attorneys, Andy and Danielle Mayoris, walk us through the star's looming fortune fight.
Ford quite possibly never imagined that his career would explode in the way that it did. Even if he had been confident that he would have been one of Hollywood's most famous actors someday, there's no way he could have fathomed what it would be like to bring in as much money as he did.
Off the film set, Ford split time between his sprawling Jackson Hole, Wyoming ranch and his New York City apartment, where his wife and two youngest children spent most of their time.
What can you do with all that money on a farm in Wyoming?
It's buried in various places.
The Fords had a marriage that other Hollywood stars seemed to envy. From the outside looking in, it looked like they had the perfect balance between work and family life.
Harrison Ford is really this private guy. He's this big movie star, of course, but his thing was he wanted the family life to be nice and as normal as it could possibly be. So he did his best to shield his kids from the Hollywood limelight while trying to live a normal life.
On the surface, Ford had it all: fame, fortune, and a loving family. But after 17 years of marriage, problems began to emerge between him and his wife, Melissa.
Behind closed doors, there were problems building in their relationship. I mean, Harrison's wife had said she only wanted him to do one movie a year, which probably didn't sit well with him. And he had said in the past that he felt more valued on movie sets than he did at home. So he had this constant struggle. Do I want to be a dad and a husband, or do I want to be a big Hollywood movie star?
In September 2000, the public got its first indication that something was amiss in Ford's marriage when he showed up to an important charity event, flying solo.
Ford was being recognized for his contributions to the Tibetan cause, which his wife was also very involved in, so people thought it was really strange that they didn't show up to the event together.
A month later, Hollywood whispers turned into full-blown gossip after the National Enquirer printed photos of Ford sharing drinks and what looked to be an intimate conversation with TV actress Lara Flynn Boyle. While the couple denied anything was going on, in November 2000, after 17 years of marriage, Ford and Mathison issued a statement to the press.
They announced that they had separated and had been living apart for the previous month, but they remained optimistic, and they said, quote, "We sincerely hope that we can work out our differences."
The couple's statement was one thing. Ford's actions, however, were another.
Harrison Ford, he's excellent at compartmentalizing. He's actually three people in one. He's the movie star, he's the man who likes to go out carousing and living dangerously, and he's also the devoted father and family man.
Well, the only way that they've come up with this accumulated knowledge of who I am is through the movies that I've been in. The Harrison Ford, the stuff of legend, doesn't exist at all. I just work there in the Harrison Ford store.
After fighting to keep his personal life out of the spotlight for more than 2 decades, Ford had seemingly let his guard down.
The tabloids jumped all over Ford, saying he was going through a midlife crisis. There were photos of him downing tequila in a nightclub, and he was seen at the chic Hudson bar in Manhattan.
Fans were starting to think, wait, this isn't the guy I thought he was.
I've worked with numerous clients like Harrison Ford. While they have a stated preference to have a private life and to shun the spotlight, the fact is there's a side of them that actually seeks this kind of attention and wants to take a walk on the dark side.
Tabloids reported that Ford continued that walk on the dark side while on location in Kansas filming the Jackie Robinson baseball film, 42.
He had been spotted coming and going from various strip clubs. A waitress from one of the clubs claimed that Ford introduced himself as Tom the Meat Processor as he sat in front of the stage and handed out cash to strippers. One exotic dancer claimed that things got very hot and heavy between the two of them. He had tried to be inconspicuous, but that was nearly impossible when he was such a highly recognized celebrity.
Mathison was heartbroken when reports of her husband's infidelities came to light, just like any woman would be. But for Mathison, it was even more difficult because everything was playing out in the public eye.
However, 18 years of marriage wasn't so easily tossed aside, and Mathison took him back in the spring of 2001.
They were trying to work things out, especially for the sake of the children.
But when she finally gave him another shot, he blew that too.
Later that summer, on August 23, 2001, after 18 years of marriage, Melissa filed for divorce.
Their divorce was the biggest news in Hollywood. They were the model couple, they were the model parents, but they suffered the same fate as a lot of Hollywood marriages.
California is a community property state, so that means any assets acquired during the marriage belong to both of the spouses. Mathison was lucky. All the money that she made through ET was not part of the community property, so it wasn't subject to Ford going after it in the divorce. Ford, on the other hand, everything he made during the marriage would be split 50-50.
At the time, Ford was earning $20 million per year, and his assets included an 800-acre Wyoming ranch, a Connecticut estate valued at more than $6 million, a $3.5 million Manhattan apartment, and a collection of airplanes, including a Gulfstream jet worth $6 million.
It's likely that Ford never imagined the amount of money he would be making. So in his mind, maybe he thought it really wasn't that important to get a prenuptial agreement. His last divorce went very smoothly, and he didn't need to worry that much about his assets.
And without a prenuptial agreement, everything was on the table.
With homes from coast to coast, airplanes, helicopters, cars, millions of dollars in the bank, this was never going to be a simple divorce proceeding. It was on.
Harrison Ford is a classic actor, a vessel for America's heroes. He is a powerful and sought-after leading man in Hollywood's biggest budget films. He loves what he does, and it shows.
In August 2000, Harrison Ford's on-screen achievements were being overshadowed by his off-screen exploits. Reports of his excessive drinking, strip club visits, and rumored infidelities caused his wife of 18 years, screenwriter Melissa Mathison, to file for divorce. On the table was more than $90 million in assets, as well as custody of their 2 children.
States have different ways in which they treat fault in determining how that plays into a divorce. For states that consider it, infidelity could be a basis for a finding of fault.
Fortunately for Ford, the couple decided to settle outside the courtroom and avoid an ugly public battle.
Much of the divorce was handled privately. Ford also had little incentive to wage a public battle. If he tried, Mathison could have slammed him publicly with her allegations of infidelity, which probably wouldn't have served either party or their family.
Stories about Harrison's infidelities were already flying around, and the family just didn't want any more dirty laundry to be put out there.
The old adage among attorneys is that a good settlement is one where both sides walk away equally unhappy.
Because Melissa filed for divorce, she had the ability to choose the state in which to carry out the proceedings.
Forum shopping is when one of the parties decides to file in a particular state because they think they'll get a better result in that state versus another one.
For Melissa, California looked like it would be her best option.
California, like most states, is considered to be a no-fault state, which means that neither spouse has to prove fault to obtain a divorce.
However, judges are human too, and when one spouse is suspected of committing adultery, it's really hard to imagine a judge not taking that into account in some way.
And the couple's connection to California would bolster Mathison's argument that California was a proper forum for their divorce.
California is a community property state, so that means that when there is a divorce, the money is split 50-50 between the spouses. It really doesn't matter that Ford was the big breadwinner or not.
Before getting into the division of all their assets, the couple focused on their children.
Early on in the divorce proceedings, the couple decided that custody of the children would be split between them 50-50, and they wanted to keep them out of the crossfire of divorce as much as possible.
The real arguments began when the couple tried to decide how much money to award Mathison. By the time of their separation, Ford was earning as much as $25 million a movie, plus a percentage of the movie's profits.
His many assets included multiple homes and a $3.5 million New York City apartment.
They had cars, planes, movie royalties. The never-ending list of assets had to be split up.
Even though Mathison was in line to get a big payout from the divorce, considering how much money Harrison Ford was worth, she had her own money. She had been involved in writing and designing E.T., and because of that, Mathison was reportedly awarded 4 to 5% of all products bearing E.T.'s likeness. This was a lot of money. But unlike Ford, Mathison took a little hiatus from screenwriting to support him and care for their children. So while she was supporting Ford, he was the one out making millions and millions of dollars acting in movies.
So on top of her husband's liquid assets, Melissa broke new ground when she went after a portion of his future royalty payments.
Melissa argued that she was entitled to half of any future potential royalties that Harrison could earn from movies that he appeared in during the marriage.
It wasn't as if she was being greedy. That was her legal right under the state of California. Any property that was accumulated during the marriage from work that Harrison Ford had done would be part of the community property, so Mathison would be entitled to half of that.
Experts estimated that those future royalties could be worth $30 million or more. But as the divorce proceedings unfolded, Ford seemed unfazed by the amount of money he might have to shell out and continued seeing other women. Then, just months later at the 2002 Golden Globe Awards, another young actress, 38-year-old Callista Flockhart, made a splash with Ford, quite literally.
Flockhart accidentally, on purpose, spilled a drink on Harrison Ford. Now, mind you, at the time, she was one of the biggest stars on TV with her show, Ally McBeal. But it sounds like she had a little bit of a crush on Harrison Ford.
The two stayed in touch and they began dating in 2002. And of course, their relationship was a really hot topic for the tabloids. They ate it up.
In June 2003, with his divorce settlement still pending 2.5 years after being filed, Ford surprised fans when he uncharacteristically opened up about his personal life during an interview with Hello Magazine.
Harrison Ford's usually pretty guarded during his interviews. But at one point during an interview, he let it be known that he was in love with Flockhart.
Ford may have been all smiles in front of the cameras, but leaving his wife, Melissa Mathison, would come at a hefty price to his family and his finances.
When things were said and done, Mathison came away with the third most costly divorce settlement in Hollywood history.
By the summer of 2003, Harrison Ford had been enjoying many years as one of Hollywood's most iconic stars and highest earners, raking in $20 million per movie.
It's no musical comedy, David.
He had separated from his second wife, Melissa Mathison, more than 2 years prior, when reports of Ford's drunken antics and infidelities hit the news. Legal analysts Andy and Danielle Mayoris walk us through some of Hollywood's priciest legal conflicts, including the one between Ford and his wife as they tried to reach a divorce settlement.
As an attorney, when I've represented clients in a divorce, I have to say it can get really ugly. It's not really about the property, it's all these emotions that can come out.
And when you're trying to value future earnings such as royalties or other business valuations, that makes the whole thing much more complicated.
Harrison Ford is a complicated man. He's more complicated than it first seems. There's a side of him that actually does want the attention.
The notoriously private actor came forward in June of 2003, telling fans he was in love with his new girlfriend, 38-year-old Ally McBeal star Callista Flockhart.
Oftentimes, by the time a divorce is filed, the relationship has disintegrated a long time ago, and the parties are really ready to move on.
While Ford may have been trying to move on with his life, he still had a huge divorce settlement hanging over his head. For nearly 3 years, the media had been speculating about how the more than $90 million in assets would be divided.
How assets are valued in a divorce is tricky. Let's say one side wants a certain asset, like an airplane, for example. Well, the value has to be determined so that the other side gets equivalent assets.
While most people may not have something to fight over, like Han Solo action figure royalties, this same issue is a very common source of disputes when a divorcing couple has one or more businesses. The more assets involved, the more complicated it gets.
Finally, in January 2004, a settlement was reached.
When things were said and done, Mathison came away with the third most costly divorce settlement in Hollywood history. Her estimated haul was between $85 and $118 million.
Ford kept his motorcycle and car collection, as well as 6 aircrafts, although Mathison did win the right to use one of his jets anytime she desired. Apparently, she had very little interest in these possessions and preferred the cash.
In the settlements, it was said that he would remain at their Wyoming ranch worth $47.4 million after paying Mathison half of its value and giving her one of the 7 huge lots adjoining the main house so she could build a home there for herself.
Melissa was also granted a share of Ford's future royalties from the films he made while they were together.
Melissa had a great legal team, and they pushed hard to get a big share of future royalties for her. Some experts believe that this could add up to $30 million or even more. Harrison Ford illustrates why you should hope for the best but plan for the worst in marriage with a prenuptial agreement.
Settlements can work to both parties' advantages. It can avoid a long, drawn-out, and expensive court battle.
Given his history, it's almost certain that when Harrison Ford surrendered his assets in his second divorce, it was just giving up, letting go of the wheel, if you will. Also, I think he knew deep down that he could go earn more money elsewhere. This wasn't the end for him.
I've been able to grow older in this business, and I love the fact that you get a chance to change.
Having finalized the divorce, Ford was ready to move on with his life with Flockhart. But he was pulled back into the past when his first wife, Mary Marquardt, reached advanced stages of multiple sclerosis in 2005. As co-parents of their children, the two had remained friendly.
As he began to care for Mary, Ford put his acting career on hold and focused on family and his relationships. He reportedly bought Mary a house and provided her with nurses and caretakers. Both he and Callista were there for her during the treatment.
As of 2018, Mary is still living under the care of her family and children.
The fact that Ford was there for his ex-wife Mary and their 2 sons when she really needed him and she was sick shows that he didn't lose touch with reality. He probably remembered the fact that she was with him when he didn't have much of anything to his name.
Harrison's break lasted until 2008, when an old friend came calling.
Is Indiana Jones gone for good?
I guess I could do one more.
For a cool $20 million, he donned his trusty fedora in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
It had been 20 years since the last Indiana Jones movie, and the fans just went wild for the new one. Now, even though he was 66 years old, Harrison Ford was still cracking the whip as Indiana Jones.
It was just a pleasure to be able to put it all back on. The character came back very quickly.
The movie earned more than $780 million at the box office, making it the highest-grossing film in the Indiana Jones franchise, and proving that Ford was still box office gold. Things were golden in his personal life, too. In 2010, Ford married his girlfriend of 8 years, actress Callista Flockhart.
All signs point to the pair having a really solid relationship. Before they got married, Harrison even adopted her son, Liam.
A big question a lot of people were wondering was, did Harrison Ford get a prenup this time? You would think after making that mistake not once but twice, he certainly would have gotten one the third time, but it never came out publicly whether they had one or not.
Who knows if Ford has a prenuptial agreement with Callista Flockhart? But we do know if he doesn't have one and he exhibits infidelities again, he could be looking at another costly divorce.
Things were going well in his relationship with Flockhart, but tragedy struck Ford's family again in November 2015 when, more than 10 years after their divorce, his second wife, Melissa Mathison, succumbed to a rare form of cancer and passed away within months of being diagnosed.
Ford remained quiet about Mathison's death and didn't release a public statement after her passing.
Perhaps the bitterness of their divorce didn't fade, even though Mathison had passed away. Or maybe this was simply an example of Ford being private.
As Ford let go of one piece of his past, he chose to embrace the future when he reprised his role as Han Solo in the 2015 film Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
This was a hugely nostalgic moment for Star Wars fans, seeing Harrison Ford back on the big screen again. It really brought me back to my childhood, seeing Han Solo and Princess Leia on the big screen again side by side.
I have to ask you about Star Wars. They are making the new Star Wars films. You are going to be involved. No!
Even at 75 years old, Ford commanded a huge paycheck. Reportedly, he was paid $25 million and 0.5% of all gross earnings, which combined with his pay from the fourth installment of Indiana Jones makes him the highest paid actor in the world.
For the first Star Wars movie, Harrison Ford was paid $10,000. Now, for the latest installment, he was paid 2,500 times more than that and also got a percentage of the gross.
And less than a year later, a question that Star Wars fans had always wondered was finally answered.
Carrie Fisher, who played Princess Leia in Star Wars, passed away in 2016. Shortly before her death, she released a book that claimed that she and Ford had an affair while filming the first Star Wars film.
In typical Ford fashion, he was very tight-lipped about the story. He told a GQ reporter that he hadn't read Fisher's book, and because of her untimely death, he didn't want to say anything about the affair.
More than 50 years after first catching the acting bug, Ford became the world's highest-grossing actor in 2016. Racking up more than $4.6 billion in box office sales in his career. And Ford wasn't done. Soon after, Indiana Jones fans rejoiced when they learned Ford had signed on for the 5th installment of the series. He's expected to be 79 at the time of its release.
79 years old and still playing an action hero. That just speaks volumes about his career and the fact that fans can't seem to get enough of him.
Ford's big screen success came at a hefty price to his personal life and his bank account, as he struggled to walk the line between celebrity, husband, and father.
Harrison Ford seems to have found a good thing with Callista Flockhart in his new life, but only time will tell.
Harrison Ford is one of the most bankable stars on the big screen of the last 50 years, earning millions for himself and grossing billions in the movies he's starred in. But his success has come at a cost.
It's an adventure from another world.
I don't really want to explain it. I'm happy that I've been very lucky in my life, but I have no instinct to try and make sense of it.